right, good morning. Welcome everybody to Bible class here at Holy Cross. Those of you who are here in the building and those of you joining us online, whether that's in real time right now on Sunday morning or a little later during the week, we're happy to have you either way as we get back into our discussion of the book of Exodus and the story of God making for himself a people. And it's an ongoing story, a work that God is continuing to do in the lives of his people today and the lives of all the faithful to make us to be his treasured nation and his royal priests. So welcome to our time together this morning. For those of you who are here in the building, there is a sort of new lesson sheet. It's the one we put out 2 weeks ago. We didn't get to it. It has the wrong date on it. And the date isn't even 2 weeks ago. It's like a month ago. That's what you do when you take old files and you start working to make them new files and you forget to do the obvious thing like change the date. At any rate, you can help yourself to that. If you're online, you can go to the church website, and the study notes are there as well. They have all the same problems that the printed version does, the wrong date, and probably all the same spelling and grammatical errors as well. And if you have any questions that you want to direct to me or things you'd like to throw into the discussion, you're more than welcome to do that. In here, of course, just stick your hand in the air and we'll get to you. And if you're online, you can just fire an email off to me. My other tablet is here. My phone is out in the car. So I have my other tablet going this morning, and it seems to be functioning fine. So we'll be able to answer questions as we go along. At any rate, it is the second Sunday of Easter, and not many people realize this, but a lot of trauma on Easter. You know, Easter, the first Easter, of course, a lot of fear and bewilderment and people running around in all directions. Here's something that you can see a couple of people are still in counseling, probably after their Easter experience. I think I've shown you this picture before, but I love it more every time because there's always something new that I see. In this particular review of it, I noticed that the guy's eyes aren't even level. You know, I mean, it's just like how to frighten the heck out of children at Easter time. Here's the Easter bunny. He looks a little mangy and all of that. Yeah, all right. Couple of church signs that I came across a while ago here. This one speaks for itself. Somebody didn't see something coming, I guess. And another one here. This is a custom in some churches. I was a bit surprised to see it at a Baptist church, but at any rate, in some services in the churches in the springtime, they have services to bless the animals. This church was taking it a bit of a different direction, however. Anyway, yeah, sure. And then everybody's in a rush these days to get DNA done. One of the kids even got the DNA of our dog done. And the results of that were surprising, to say the least. We have a small black and white dog who looks like a border collie, but according to the DNA, she's 37% golden retriever. And that's the biggest percentage of anything that's in her. So I said she fits right in for today's world. She's a golden retriever who identifies as a border collie. I've been going to get mine done just for the sheer fun of it, but this is what I fear will come back. So I haven't done it. Nor am I going to. Also for fear that I might come back as golden retriever. and that would have all sorts of interesting consequences, I'm sure. All right, so once again, welcome to Bible class. The notes are on the web page. Answers or questions. If you have answers to my questions, you can email those in too. But if you have questions you'd like to have answered, fire those off to the email address or stick your hand in the air. We are at Mount Sinai. And as I intimated in the introduction to the class, this is all about God making the people of Israel His people. There was that kind of overarching question that was hanging over the entire trip out of Egypt down to Mount Sinai. That question, what are we doing here? What's this all about? Especially once they got out and they realized it wasn't perfect. There was no food, there was no water, there were enemies. It wasn't an easy journey. Even these first few months were a challenging time. And the people grumbled, they complained, they complained to Moses, they complained to God, they were angry, they were rebellious. And God, is at work. He tells us when we finally get to Mount Sinai, this is what we're doing here. We're making a people, making you guys, the people of Israel, into a nation. And that work gets serious in Exodus chapter 20, where the people have finally gathered, as I said, at Mount Sinai. They've seen, if you will, the opening act of God's presence descending upon the mountain. And Moses and Aaron are ascending partway up the mountain at least. The people are barred from even touching the mountain. It has billowed smoke, and the Lord has descended in a fire. The mountain has trembled violently, and there's been the sound of the trumpet that grows louder and louder and louder. And then Exodus 20 begins with this sentence. And if you want to follow along in a Pew Bible, that we're at Exodus chapter 20. The opening sentence of that chapter, and God spoke all these words. And we don't want to just blow over that as if that's just, okay, this is what happened. Everything has been made ready. The days of purification have passed. The warnings have been given. And God then speaks directly to the people. And whenever God speaks, something important is happening. It's worthwhile, I think, for us to stop and remember at this point in time that that's how God brought the world into being in the first place. The same God who spoke creation into existence now speaks directly to Israel to make them to be His people, His chosen possession, His holy nation, His kingdom of priests. So, in a certain sense, He's doing here what He did back in Genesis. In Genesis, it was to speak creation. Let there be light, and there was light. Let there be animals, and there were animals. Let there be sun, moon, and stars, and it was so, and it was good, and it was very good. But now He's zeroing in that out of this whole creation, out of all this that He's spoken into existence, now I want to take one group of people, and I want you to be my special, treasured, holy nation. And that's what's happening there, and He's going to speak it into existence. God spoke all these words. And it's important that we stop and just ponder a little bit about how He speaks. I don't want to make this too much like a grammar class or something like that. But if you know even the real basics of grammar and language, you know that there are different ways of expressing things. For example, you can say in a very stern voice, "No, don't do that," and kind of issue the language word would be an imperative. "No, don't do that." Or you can speak in a somewhat softer voice. The language word for that is the indicative. And you can say, "Here is something that you shouldn't do." And it's important for us to remember, I think, that even though we call what comes first in this whole business of making people, we call it the 10 Commandments, that these commandments are not given in that strong imperative voice, but they're actually given in a kind of a revealing way, where God is saying, here are things you are to do, and here are things you are not to do. And even when we get to the negative commandments, the commandments like you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, Hebrew has a couple of different ways of expressing those sorts of things. We won't go into the details, but there's a really strong way that, what you might call the shouting way, and then there's the kind of the speaking way. And the without fail, in the giving of the 10 Commandments, what we call the 10 Commandments, it's done in that speaking voice. This isn't done in the yelling and screaming kind of voice. It sort of reminds me of my grade 3 teacher, a woman named Miss Campbell, who we all hoped we would not get as a teacher. Because anytime we had walked by her classroom in grades 1 and 2, it always seemed there was a lot of yelling going on in the room, and she was good at it. But I always remember the very first day of class when she tried to, was teaching us how she wanted us to behave. And she did it all in this very kind of matter-of-fact sort of a way. And I remember her saying, I don't raise my voice any louder in the classroom than I do when I'm in my own kitchen. And I remember thinking to myself, well, you must have yelled a lot in your kitchen. But what she laid out for us was in this very conversational sort of a way, how we were to behave in her classroom. When we misbehaved, that's when we got the sharper version. And maybe that's a kind of a useful thing to keep in mind. God here is not yelling at his people. God here is speaking to them in a way that reveals his will to them and that explains his will to them so that they can obey it. Or to put it in our own terms today, the law is given in the context of the gospel. And we see that as we move forward into the second verse. God spoke all these words. And the first word that God speaks, Exodus chapter 20, verse 2, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When we teach the 10 Commandments, we sometimes, most often times, and I would be as guilty of this as anybody, I think, forget the first word. The first word that God speaks is a word that assures the people of his love, of his care, even before they've done a thing. He loved them. He brought them up out of Egypt, saved them. They didn't save themselves. He saved them. He brought them down from Egypt to Mount Sinai. He provided for them every step of the way. To put it in our common Lutheran terms, this is gospel. This is good news. I'm the God who saved you. And what I want to give to you right now, he says to them, is a guide to living in the freedom that he won for them. The Ten Commandments, and this is what sets Christianity apart from all the other religions that are out there, for the most part, I think, is that it's not, the relationship, even in the Old Testament, is not based on our performance. It's not based on how well we do, achieving a certain level of excellence in our lives. It's a relationship that's established and maintained completely by God and His grace toward you and me. And so even though the commandments are real and they mean something and they tell us something very, very important, they are never, ever to be seen as some sort of ladder that we climb, some sort of, test to see whether we're worthy of God's love or not. They're a guide for how we live because He has loved us and because He has rescued us. And we bring that over into the New Testament context where, we have experienced our own exodus. Many of us were baptized as babies before we had done a thing for God. God took us. And even if we came to faith later in life, before we began to really follow God and maybe implement His commandments in our lives, we had already experienced His grace, His saving love that brought us to Him. And so it's important that we keep the commandments in their basic, their original intent. They're there to be the guide for how God's people live. And they give us wise and helpful guidance as we journey in our relationship with God. Any comments or questions on that? I don't want to overstate the point, but I also don't, this is really foundational for understanding what God is doing here. All right, I've either baffled you completely or you're in total agreement. I'll assume it's the latter for the moment, and we'll forge ahead. All right, let's go. Oops, pushed the wrong button. The Psalms, Psalm 119, bears this out as well. The psalmist, that very long psalm, Psalm 119, I walk about in freedom, for I have sought out your precepts. I have freedom, and because I have freedom, then I follow what you have told me to do. Or James, this isn't an exact quotation because it comes in the midst of a bit of a complex sentence, but the upshot of the sentence is the perfect law gives freedom. We don't often think of the commandments that way, but in a certain sense, they're freeing us up. What God is doing here is freeing us up to live His way, to follow His basic, these basic guidelines for our lives. Another thing that the commandments do for us, just as a whole, is that they reveal to us the image of God. The image of God is what humanity was created in the garden. And we often focus, or sometimes focus, on more the physical aspects of that what God might look like. Is it what we look like? And those sorts of things. And we'll never, this side of heaven, have the answer to that question. But what the commandments do is they help us to see the character of God. And when we see the character of God, then we can begin to see how that character is put into effect in our own lives. So, for example, we learn in the commandments there's only one God. He's the only God. And He's unique. And there's no other God like Him. His name is holy. And we are to honor that name, His name that He has put upon us. We also learn that rest is part of God's character, and that we ignore that at our own peril. And that also, as we unpack the commandments, we're going to see words like honor and love are part of God's character. And what the commandments are shaping in us is the image of God as these things become real in our own lives, that we are focused on the only God. We keep Him as holy. We take seriously the command to rest. We honor those around us, and we love not just the Lord, but the people around us as He loves them. And so the image of God, from the perspective of the character of God, becomes real in our own lives as well. Comments, questions? Oh, I see Melanie, yes.
If these invite us to think about the image of God, to your comment about Christianity standing apart, I think our response and people's response through different Christian communities over the centuries show a lot about our nature as well, which is to often forget the freedom, stop focusing on God, and yes, we seek out the precepts, but we like to go back to that meritorious way of responding even to the gospel as the Hebrews did. Let's figure out how we turn these 10 gospels into 613 rules. And it wasn't just the Hebrews, it's been communities ever since. It's such a slippery slope to just forget about God's nature and forget about the freedom and forget that these words, when we respond to them, were to be oriented to recognizing and being transformed by His nature, but we often slip right back into pursuing the adherence to those rules and missing the grace of the grace giver. Right,
absolutely, yeah. Yeah, as Jesus, what Melanie was saying, for those perhaps online who wouldn't have picked that up through my microphone, there is within us this almost built-in desire to want to make it all about rules, to want to make it all about merit. And I think I made the comment last time that left to ourselves, will generally drift in one of two directions with the commandments. We may drift over into, I'll use the word liberal, but I don't know, it's not the best word either, direction that says, well, these are unattainable, so they don't really apply. We just live as we see fit, and that's that. That's one ditch. The more, and there are, churches that drift that way. The other ditch, which is equally and maybe even more dangerous in some ways, is that we know we can't do this, so let's make a whole bunch more rules that we think we can do. And Melanie's reference to the 600 plus laws that the Pharisees did. And I mean, most of these things are just sort of bringing everything down to such a basic level, covering every little aspect of life, that, okay, well, here's finally, we got some rules we can keep. Because we want it to be about rules. And it's a kind of an idolatry. We like it to be about us and our achievements. And we're not always so comfortable just letting it be about God and what God has done in our lives and us being the responders to that grace. Absolutely, yeah. And we're bad. All of us are bad for it. I catch myself all the time making little rules that I think are going to be helpful, and then I go, well, this is really not all that helpful either. I can't do that even. So, Kier.
So, to build on that, I think that we have this sort of inherent idea of a metric. We have to measure by something.
Yeah.
And we keep forgetting it's easy, it's done.
Yeah.
But this metric, every facet of our life, we do this. Did I perform well enough doing this? It doesn't matter what it is. So automatically plays it because it is important to us. So we I guess, falsely apply it here.
Yeah. Kier makes the point that this is how the world works. The world works with metrics, numbers, evaluation. Did you do it? Did you not do it? And a lot of really important decisions about our lives are based on those kinds of things. And so it becomes very easy, very natural just to bring that into our spiritual life as well. Absolutely. This is how the world operates. It's learning to operate in that different way that goes, metrics have a place, our number, but they're not the main thing. In fact, they're quite a ways away from the main thing. The main thing is God's grace, God's love, and His forgiveness. That doesn't mean we don't follow the commandments. We absolutely seek to follow the commandments, but we realize that in so doing, we're not doing this to earn, a little bit better seat at the heavenly banquet, or the praise of the people around us in the church, and all of those kind of things. I struggle with this, daily. There was a movie years ago. Remember who was the star in it now, but it was about a priest and what we would call a vicar, a student, and the priest makes the comment that the offering is taken after the sermon for a reason. He said it's the Nielsen ratings on the sermon. It took me a long time to get that out of my head because, I thought, well, yeah, okay, what if, and more so in my case because I come from a family, some of the crazy great uncles that I have would make quite a show of getting their offering ready on Sunday morning after the sermon. They'd bring the wallet out and they'd sit there in church and count out the bills, and a good one got a few more than a bad one did, and they'd stick that in the envelope and stick it in the plate. These were the same great uncles who, by the way, I hope their families that don't watch this anyway, we're distant family. They would sit in my grandmother's kitchen. A family often gathered at my grandmother's place, and they would sit there, and I have this distinct memory of two of them about every 15 minutes pulling out their wallets, counting it out, putting it back, putting their wallet in their pocket again. And next time I walked into the kitchen, it's the other one. He's got his wallet out. Making sure nobody's ripped them off at the family gathering. They haven't moved an inch. Nobody's touched their wallet. Nobody wants to know what's in their wallet, but they're keeping a close eye on the dimes, right down to the dimes. Anyway, yeah. Yeah, I got the clipboards here, so I was just going to ask our clipboard monitors to do that. Anyway, I'm just going to... All right. Okay, so keeping this in the bigger context then, understanding that this, even though we would call the commandments, the catechism, confirmation class, we call this law, and it really is given in this overall context of love. This next little matter I want to take up is a bit of a technical thing. It's not something that we need to spend a lot of time on, but we'll clear it up anyway here. One of the problems that we have when we go to kind of categorize and itemize all of this is that there are 10 words, but there are actually only 9 commands. In various church bodies through the centuries, different approaches have been taken to get us back to that nice even number of 9, or of 10 rather. Lutherans, Roman Catholics, and Anglicans and Presbyterians, I think, although I can't say for sure, tend to divide the last commandment, the last word, into 2. So if you remember confirmation class, you will recall that the 9th and the 10th commandment sound an awful lot alike. You know, the 9th one being, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. Full stop. 10th commandment, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his manservant, maidservant, his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. It's a bit of an artificial distinction. And it's because we don't typically include the first word, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, in our counting of the words. Other Christians, particularly those that followed John Calvin, who had it in for idols and everybody has it in for idols, but who also had it in for statues and things like that. They divide the first, what we would call the first commandment, into 2. And so they would number the commandments this way. Commandment 1, you shall have no other gods before me. And then commandment 2, you shall not make for yourself an idol in any form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or the waters below. You shall not bow down to them and worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, etc., etc., etc. And again, we would say, well, that's a kind of an artificial distinction. It's really the same thing being said. You'll have no other gods, and then God kind of expounds on that, what that means in particular. No images, no anything more important than Him. And this, you'll see, plaques of the commandments, and on one side there are 4, and the other side there are 6. Or when you do it our way, on one side there's 3, on the other side there's 7. It's all because there's really only 9 things that God commands, and we'd be easier. It might be easier if we actually just did it the way it's supposed to be. I would just argue, but I'm in the minority voice there. The dead weight of tradition weighs heavily upon us, and so we split them one place or the other, even either at the beginning or the end. So yeah, if you may have come out of a tradition where the 2nd commandment is all about idols, and the 3rd commandment is about God's name, and the 4th commandment is about the Sabbath day. Or you come out of our tradition where those are 3 commandments, and we have this rather other artificial distinction about coveting at the end. People have lined up written books on this, but that's as far as we're going to take this, unless you want to debate this ad nauseum. Anybody want to debate this? Honor your father and then honor your mother. That would, in a certain sense, by reducing it to the absurd, as you've just done, you show the kind of the fallacy of the thing is there are only 9 of them, 9 things that God really commands, and we try to divide that up a little differently, based on our own peculiarities here. We have a comment from the field here. All right. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Yeah, Gord here is just talking about the different numberings too, and the Jewish numbering that splits things a little differently yet again. Yeah, for sure. We won't. This is all just sort of gets a little blurring after a while. Yes, James. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. You can't. Yeah. You start. Yeah. There's an inherent risk in trying to number these things in the first place. They're really a whole, and they are to be kind of kept as a whole. Yeah. This is the thing. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Right, yes. And he says, love God. Yeah. And love your neighbor. Yeah. Speaking to this. Yeah, it is. Yeah, Jesus kind of. Yeah. You're absolutely very good point. Jesus, cuts through all of this, different opinions on the numbering of things by saying, look, folks, there's basically two. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the two commandments. And it gets reduced even further. Paul will say love is the fulfillment of the law. So yeah, it is a sense that, this is the sort of stuff that people can go on and on and on and on, and you're no further ahead at the end of the day. And I debated even putting it in, but I thought, basically, we have people coming out of different traditions and different backgrounds, just to include it. It is what it is, and like I say, we did have somebody years ago made an overture to the Synod Convention that in Lutheran Church Canada we adopt a different numbering for the commandments that includes, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, and as the first word. And I was on this committee, and the pastor who was in charge of it said, well, if we just do that, that'll have the people flocking in. Yeah, he said. Yeah, we want to have 10. Somehow we got to get 10. 10 is the number, Yeah. Yeah, where are we at here? Yeah, exactly. Did I see a hand back there, Elroy?
Where did the number 10 come from? I mean, is that biblical?
It is the 10 words. The Hebrews recall it as the 10 words. And they keep that first word in. And so they keep that first word in. So it's always been the 10 words. And then just kind of as time went on, the tradition became the 10 commandments, and that first word got dropped off in the church's history. And then it's like, okay, now we got 9. What do we do now? And so we got to get back to 10. So yeah. Anyway, all right. Thematically, there's also a progression, and it kind of goes in a very Hebrew kind of style, which is to have the same thoughts at the beginning and in the middle, or at the beginning and the end, same thoughts, and then similar thoughts in the middle. So if you want to think about the commandments for just a half a second, the way we'll use our numbering here. The first commandment is really about our thoughts to some degree, that we have no other gods before us, that we let nothing come into our mind, into our life, that is more important than God. The second commandment deals with our words, how we use God's name, and how we, whether we use it to deceive or whether we use it to pray, praise, and give thanks to God. The third commandment is about an action, taking rest, honoring the Sabbath day. And then the next several commandments, 4 through 7, continue to be about our deeds, honoring our parents, not murdering, not committing adultery, and not stealing. The 8th commandment, again, comes to our words, and that we not bear false witness against those around us. And then at the very end, what we call the 9th and 10th commandment, the word on coveting. Coveting is a thought. And we kind of come, full circle with the commandments. And in a kind of a way, the commandments, it's in the keeping. This is just on the lesson sheet here. That as it's this commandment that we sometimes just sort of blow over because who doesn't covet, that really links us back to the first commandment again, because when we covet things, we're letting something become more important for God. I think I put it in here somewhere that it's where the disobedience to this commandment is where the disobedience to the other commandments begins. Anyway, we'll maybe talk about that a little more as we go on. What I wanted to do, and we're not going to go through the commands one by one, though if you do have questions about any of the commandments, we can certainly ask those. But what I wanted to do is to kind of take them in two sections. First of all, the first table, what we call the first table of the law, the three commands that focus on our relationship with God. You will have no other gods before me. You will not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, and remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. I'd like to take those kind of as a group and talk about them, and particularly in light of the commentary that God himself gives on those commandments in what we in the Catechism call the close of the commandments, which is again a mistitling, because it doesn't come at the end of the commandments. It comes right at the very beginning of the commandments. The verse that talks about the Lord being a jealous God. I, the Lord your God, this is Exodus chapter 20, beginning halfway through verse 5. I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. And I think as we understand more what God means about being a jealous God, we will understand better how these commandments tie together and shape our life. Because what we really, in our own thinking about things, we tend to think of jealousy as a solely negative thing. The 9th and the 10th commandments talk about jealousy. Coveting is jealousness of what other people have. But there's another way to understand jealous, and that's to see jealousy as an expression of love. And that's what we're going to try to do, but we're going to have to leave it until next time because we're out of time. I'm kind of dragging here for the last little bit, but we'll pick it up with that, and next time we'll kind of walk ourselves through the first table and then hopefully have some time to get into the second table of the law as well and try to understand what God is saying to us when he talks about being a jealous God and how that's reflected in the commandments and in how we live our lives. Any last-minute questions, comments, observations? Anybody got any tablets of stone they want to throw? All right. We'll leave it there for today, and we'll forge ahead next Sunday. Let's close with a prayer. Gracious God, Heavenly Father, you have loved us and made us to be your people. Help us to walk in the ways that your people walk, following in your commands, not to earn your love, but as a joyful thanks for the love you have given to us. We pray that you'd bless us as we study these things and think about them, that lead us to an even more authentic walk with you, our Lord and Savior. We ask it all in the name of our risen Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, that's it for today.